Authorities in El Salvador have been conducting a massive security operation as part of a crackdown on gangs in the country. Thousands of troops and police officers have been deployed to the province of Cabañas, where the government says members of two gangs are hiding out.
BBC News. Now we're going to head to El Salvador, where back in February, the president announced he was moving thousands of high-ranking gang members to the country's new so-called mega jail. Since then, there's been no information released.
Today, we delve into the remarkable ascent of Nayib Bukele, the 43rd president of the Republic of El Salvador. From his humble beginnings as mayor of Nuevo Cuscatlán to his current controversial presidency, we explore the transformative journey of a leader who has captured both national adoration and international scrutiny. The outset of the ascent didn't resemble a typical beginning of a rise. Not too far from the capital city of El Salvador, San Salvador lies the smaller city of Santa Tecla. Just beyond Santa Tecla is the quaint coffee town of Nuevo Cuscatlán. Despite being only a short 7-mile, 12-kilometer drive from San Salvador, this city of 7,000 inhabitants feels worlds away from the bustling capital. It was here in 2012 that 2,754 voters placed their trust in a young, business-savvy political newcomer for mayor. He managed to defeat the Conservative Party opposition by a razor-thin margin of just 169 votes. However, this narrow victory didn't dampen the ambition of the young Nayib Bukele. Although he ran under the banner of the left-wing FMLN, Bukele's campaign from the outset was less about party affiliation and more about a clear purpose. He was a confident and energetic 30-year-old, determined to tackle crime and corruption while prioritizing investments in education, infrastructure, and community development. Today, the impact of Nayib Bukele, tenure as mayor, is evident in Nuevo Cuscatlán. Firstly, his focus was on education. Upon assuming office, Nayib Bukele announced that he would forgo his salary to instead fund a scholarship program. In the same year, Nuevo Cuscatlán's literacy rate stood at a mere 15%. With the launch of a citywide reading program, the Salvadoran media celebrated when, by 2015, the city had eradicated illiteracy, becoming the third town in the department to achieve this milestone and surpassing the national average significantly. Another notable achievement that Bukele would later highlight in his political campaigns was the city's remarkably low homicide rate during his time in office. While the exact figures were subject to debate, the exceptionally low number of homicides was a source of great pride for Nuevo Cuscatlán. This was particularly significant given El Salvador's ongoing struggle against the violent and deeply rooted MS-13 and Barrio 18 gangs since the conclusion of the Civil War in 1992. Facing the ongoing challenge of hyper-violent and exceptionally brutal gangs since his teenage years, Nayib Bukele understood that even in a relatively safe small town, achieving such a commendable safety record in a country plagued by gang violence was an accomplishment as significant as advancements in education for the youthful mayor. Bukele's tenure saw tangible successes. By the end of 2012, Nuevo Cuscatlán inaugurated its first 24/7 medical clinic. Unperturbed by financial concerns, the city swiftly commenced the construction of a new library and embarked on a multi-million-dollar water project, ensuring round-the-clock access to drinking water, a stark improvement from the previous meager 3-hour availability. Within 3 years, Nuevo Cuscatlán transformed from an unremarkable provincial town to a model of progress, showcasing that bold action by politicians could indeed effect positive change for all. Simultaneously, Nayib Bukele's own trajectory mirrored this rapid transformation, transitioning from obscurity to prominence. Before his political career, Nayib Bukele had traversed paths in consulting and political advertising, leveraging his professional acumen in his newfound role. Every endeavor, whether infrastructure or educational projects, bore Bukele's imprint. His adept utilization of his professional background ensured that no commendable action went unnoticed or underreported. Moreover, Nayib Bukele extended his brand beyond the confines of the internet. His YouTube channel featured clips of interviews and debates aired on local television, showcasing his accessibility and engagement with the community. These videos portrayed Bukele interacting with residents, particularly children, and commemorating milestones such as the inauguration of the medical center, thereby reinforcing his image as a leader deeply connected to the populace. The branding effort extended to physical manifestations as well. The light blue M emblem, replacing the city's prior logo, adorned everything associated with Nayib Bukele's administration, from the library and hospital to signage at city limits and construction sites. This emblem served as a visual testament to the positive transformations directly attributable to Bukele's leadership. His approach succeeded in reshaping the city and concurrently crafting a personal image as a champion of the people, unafraid to pursue ambitious projects and take decisive action. Although Bukele's mayoral term lasted just 3 years, journalists visiting Nuevo Cuscatlán years later struggled to find anyone with a negative opinion of him. While his time as mayor was transformative, it was also brief, as both he and the FMLN recognized his enormous potential in a political landscape dominated by aging voices from the Civil War era. The natural progression for Bukele was the mayor's office of the nation's capital, San Salvador. Despite the vast difference in scale between San Salvador and Nuevo Cuscatlán, Bukele adopted a similar approach, investing in infrastructure, revitalizing markets, and endorsing flashy projects to bolster his image alongside the city's development. As Bukele's popularity soared nationally, other troubling trends emerged. Upon taking office, he faced the collapse of a truce between MS-13, Barrio 18, and the national government, resulting in a drastic increase in homicide rates. By 2015, the country's homicide rate had skyrocketed to the highest globally, with an average of 18 homicides per day and a staggering rate of 103 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. Simultaneously, the nation's prisons were overflowing due to the federal government's reversion to heavy-handed gang policies, leading to a significant increase in the incarceration rate. Salvadorans, grappling with the pervasive threat of gang violence impacting every aspect of daily life, became increasingly desperate for change. In this climate, Bukele's rising name recognition and image as a bold reformer gained traction. The country was in turmoil, with gangs committing senseless killings while the government indiscriminately arrested citizens. The populace grew disillusioned with old politicians and outdated policies, paving the way for Bukele's emergence onto the national stage. For decades, El Salvador's political landscape had been dominated by a two-party system, the FMLN or ARENA. Serious contenders for high office rarely dared to run without aligning themselves with one of these parties. Despite his rising popularity, Bukele found his support within the FMLN dwindling as he consistently diverged from their platform and broke ranks. Consequently, he struggled to secure the votes of his own party members for his mayoral ambitions, with internal party dynamics becoming a barrier to his goals. This led to a vicious cycle of mutual criticism between Bukele and the FMLN, ultimately resulting in his expulsion from the party. Despite his rising popularity, Bukele found his support within the FMLN dwindling as he consistently diverged from their platform and broke ranks, deemed a violation of the party's ethics policies. However, it was widely understood that his increasingly strained and adversarial relationship with the party played a significant role. The fallout with the FMLN disrupted what seemed like a predetermined path toward the presidency for Bukele. Without the support of either major party, a successful presidential bid seemed improbable. Nonetheless, he pressed on, aspiring to form his party. Unable to do so in time for the upcoming election, Bukele allied with the Gran Alianza por la Unidad Nacional, allowing his unlikely presidential campaign to commence. While traditional nominees, backed by established parties, pursued conventional campaign strategies of TV appearances, radio interviews, and stump speeches, Bukele took a different approach. He argued that the entrenched political system was the root of the problem, promising to dismantle the establishment and combat corruption. His message resonated widely, conveyed primarily through social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter, where he garnered immense engagement. Bukele's campaign events, few in number, resembled more festive gatherings than traditional political rallies. He often appeared dressed more like a Silicon Valley CEO than a typical presidential candidate. As Election Day approached, polls increasingly favored him. So confident was he in his position that he chose not to participate in debates, eschewing engagement with the mainstream political candidacy system. While risky, his strategy paid off handsomely. On Election Day, the FMLN candidate secured 14.4% of the vote, Arena won 31.7%, and Nayib Bukele, the 37-year-old outsider, commanded an impressive 53.1%, a decisive victory that rendered the almost inevitable runoff unnecessary. On June 1, 2019, Bukele assumed the presidency, becoming the 43rd president of the Republic of El Salvador. Change came swiftly under his leadership. Shortly thereafter, Bukele introduced his Territorial Control Plan, aimed at transforming El Salvador from one of the most perilous countries to a place where people could venture outside without fear. The plan reportedly consisted of 6 phases, with the 7th to be enacted only if the preceding ones proved ineffective. Each phase was unveiled as it commenced. The initial phase, named Preparation, began just 20 days into Bukele's presidency. It involved deploying a surge of police and military personnel into 12 of the nation's most dangerous communities, effectively controlled by gangs. Additionally, a state of emergency was declared in the country's prisons, halting visitation and communications to prevent incarcerated gang leaders from coordinating. The subsequent phase, titled Opportunity, aimed to garner public support before more aggressive measures. This phase utilized a $91 million loan from the Central American Bank for economic integration to invest in community centers, skate parks, schools, and other services designed to dissuade young people from joining gangs. However, Phase 3, Modernization, presented challenges. This phase aimed to equip the country's national security forces with $109 million worth of modern equipment, including drones, helicopters, and firearms, to effectively combat gangs. The major obstacle to implementing this phase was the need for approval from the country's legislative assembly. Notably, this assembly was elected in March 2018. Nearly a year prior to Bukele's election, the legacy parties, Arena and FMLN, collectively held 53 of the 84 seats in the Legislative Assembly, securing a solid majority. In contrast, Bukele's adopted party, Ghana, had a mere 10 seats. This numerical disadvantage meant that, in order to enact any significant measures, including securing a $109 million loan, the president had to negotiate with lawmakers from the very parties he had previously challenged during his campaign. Predictably, these parties demanded greater transparency regarding the allocation of funds, stalling the approval process for the loan and Phase 3 of Bukele's Territorial Control Plan. This deadlock precipitated a contentious situation. Bukele purportedly invoked Article 107, Part 7 of the Constitution, which allowed the president to convene an extraordinary session of the Legislative Assembly when the interests of the Republic demanded. While the wording of this provision was ambiguous, many questioned whether the lack of loan approval constituted a situation warranting an emergency legislative session, as lawmakers debated the legality of Nayib Bukele's maneuver and whether they should attend the session scheduled for Sunday. Bukele asserted that it was their constitutional obligation to do so. He even issued a thinly veiled threat, reminding the public of Article 87 of the Constitution, which grants the people the right to mount an insurrection if lawmakers fail to adhere to the Constitution. Bukele called upon his supporters to gather at the Legislative Assembly, prepared to overthrow the government if necessary. Consequently, supporters surrounded the building on the designated day. However, only 20 of the 84 lawmakers showed up, far below the quorum required to legally vote on legislation. Nevertheless, Bukele arrived at the assembly, accompanied not only by his entourage, but also by dozens of armed police and military personnel clad in military attire. Surrounding the lawmakers, Bukele delivered a brief, impassioned 10-minute speech demanding a return to what he deemed constitutional order. He expressed fury at the majority of lawmakers for defying what he considered a crucial mandate. The pivotal question surrounding the event was its interpretation. Was Bukele's deployment of the army and police merely a symbolic gesture to underscore the importance of passing legislation to better equip them? Or was it a display of strength, an implicit threat to lawmakers that the armed forces were aligned with him, especially given the imminent $109 million allocation to them? The series of events swiftly spiraled into what was widely regarded as a constitutional crisis, drawing international criticism. However, attention quickly shifted as the COVID-19 virus breached El Salvador's borders on March 21st, prompting Bukele to declare a mandatory nationwide lockdown. Violators faced detention in designated pandemic containment centers. Legal concerns emerged almost immediately as approximately 70 individuals were arrested in the early hours of March 22nd, prior to the official publication of the decree. Arrests were made for violations of a law that hadn't been officially disclosed, including individuals not wearing masks despite no legal requirement yet in place, and those traveling to jobs deemed essential by the decree itself. The law was constitutionally dubious from the outset and applied with arbitrary and problematic interpretation. Within weeks, the Supreme Court invalidated the decree, ruling that detention without due process could only be justified based on suspicion of infection, not mere violation of lockdown orders. Despite this ruling, Bukele contested it, introducing a loophole wherein violators of the lockdown would be detained under suspicion of potential infection due to their breach of the orders. This pattern continued into 2021. On February 28th, the country voted in a new legislative assembly, with Bukele's party, Nuevo Ideas, decisively emerging victorious. Bukele's enduring popularity, with approval ratings hovering around 90%, propelled his party to win 56 of the 84 seats, granting them a majority. Consequently, Bukele no longer faced opposition from FMLN and Arena. However, one significant obstacle remained: the Supreme Court. Despite having a majority in the legislature, Bukele contended that the court's rulings were arbitrary and hindered his pandemic management efforts. The national legislature voted to oust the 5 dissenting judges, enabling Bukele to replace them with 5 new judges who would align with his objectives. With this move, Bukele effectively controlled all 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial, allowing him unprecedented authority to pursue his agenda. El Salvador's weekend of March 25th through 27th, 2022 was tragic. Nobody's exactly sure why, but the gangs were mad. Many speculate in response to the breakdown of a secret truce between them and the government special treatment in jail in exchange for relative peace on the streets. Whatever it was, some 87 seemingly random people were murdered and Bukele was furious. Years of slow and steady progress, a small early sign of success of his Territorial Control Plan, were reversed in just one weekend, so he went to the Legislative Assembly and they approved a 30-day so-called state of exception, suspending constitutional rights police wouldn't have to tell people why they're being arrested. They wouldn't need to read them. Their rights detainees wouldn't have a right to legal counsel, and they could be held for up to 15 days without seeing a judge. Exception paved the way for mass arbitrary detention, so that's exactly what came. Quick police and military swarmed gang strongholds, arresting any known members, but also arresting anyone who appeared that they could be in a gang. Tattoos by themselves were enough to get thrown in jail. Police were reportedly subject to daily arrest quotas and encountered little blowback for false arrests, pushing them to just arrest anyone that they could imagine being a gang member, regardless of facts or evidence. By midnight Sunday of that tragic weekend, Some 600 people had been arrested by the end of the week, 6,000, and now, 1 year on with the state of exception having been renewed, nearly 70,000 suspected gang members have been detained. 2% nation's adult population is behind bars in overcrowded prisons, stuffed 3 or 4 times beyond capacity, waiting to make their way through an overburdened judicial system. Mothers and fathers still search in desperation for their arrested children, unable to track them down in the system even after a year. But increasingly, they're being sent here to the brand new Terrorism Confinement Center. This facility was built at breakneck pace once the gang roundups began and opened for business in early 2023. It was introduced to the nation 3 highly choreographed, scripted, and produced 35-minute video tour with Bukele. Throughout the video, stressed the president's influence on the project. How his logic and smarts created a better system and exhibited the scale of the security forces, thanks to Bukele, the quality of their equipment. Thanks to Bukele and the ultimate degree of control. The government would have thanks to Bukele. After all, the prison was capable of holding some 40,000 inmates, making it the largest prison in the world, a single facility capable of housing the population of a small country. The thing is, all of this worked while in March 2022, the country averaged 4.8 homicides a day, a bump upwards over the years, average of 3. The 1st of April, the first full month of the roundup, saw just 1.3 in May. The trend continued just 0.5 homicides a day. In fact, since April 2022, not a single month encountered an average daily homicide count over 1. While some may question the accuracy of the data, the undeniable truth remains. El Salvador is experiencing a level of safety unseen in decades. For many residents, it's the first time in their lives that they can walk the streets and live without constant fear. This newfound sense of security is transformative, offering a glimpse of a brighter future in a nation that has long been plagued by hopelessness. Despite the erosion of checks and balances and breakdown of the judicial system, President Bukele's popularity remains unwavering. While thousands may be unjustly detained and the democratic process may face challenges, the majority of Salvadorans believe that the ends justify the means. Opinion polls continue to show Bukele's approval rating, hovering around 90%, solidifying his status as one of the most popular presidents globally. However, Bukele's image is markedly different on the international stage. He has faced condemnation from entities such as the United Nations, Human Rights Watch, and the U.S. State Department, with international media expressing concerns about democratic regression in El Salvador. With 9 months remaining until the next presidential elections, Bukele has announced his intention to run, despite Article 152 of the country's constitution, which seemingly prohibits consecutive presidential terms. While this provision was traditionally interpreted as disallowing consecutive terms, the newly overhauled Supreme Court, appointed by Bukele, reversed course in 2021, citing the will of the people as justification. Although little legal justification was provided, it's undeniable that the majority of Salvadorans support Bukele remaining in power. Bukele has tackled the nation's most pressing issues in a manner supported by the people. Despite consolidating power across all 3 branches of government, he has retained the support of the populace at every step of the way. With few, if any, legal constraints on his power, President Bukele effectively holds the authority to modify or reinterpret the Constitution at his discretion, rendering him akin to a democratically elected dictator. The disparity between the perception of El Salvadorians and that of the global community carries a sense of paternalism. It appears as if the developed world is asserting its superiority by suggesting that the Salvadoran people are incapable of autonomous decision-making. This dynamic has characterized El Salvador's relationship with the United States, which has historically intervened in Salvadoran domestic politics. Much of the purported international concern likely stems from this historical interference. However, a separate aspect of the concern likely arises from a more objective, rational analysis. Those who haven't experienced decades of conflict may offer a clearer understanding of the sacrifices being made to combat the debilitating gang violence crisis. While leaders may come and go, and even if Bukele were a benevolent dictator for life, the eventual transition of power is inevitable, either democratically or through mortality. Checks and balances in a democratic system may impede progress, but they also ensure methodical decision-making. Such a system relies on the process itself rather than any individual, prioritizing long-term stability over short-term gains. El Salvador, however, has upended this approach, concentrating power in one individual and sacrificing long-term stability for immediate results. Perhaps the Salvadoran people are correct in deeming it a sacrifice worth making to address the nation's foremost challenge. Alternatively, international observers may be correct in their assessment that the country is making a monumental mistake. Regardless, it is the sovereign right of the Salvadoran people to determine their path without external interference. Even if this entails the democratic election of a dictator, it remains their prerogative as a nation. Thank you for joining us to explore the complex dynamics of El Salvador's political landscape and the transformative leadership of President Bukele.